everybody, to this 15th edition of the WiSER Wisdom Series. It's a pleasure to share some time with you. We're going to be looking at the interface between renewable energy, gender, and climate justice. And we've got a couple of fantastic speakers here for you. We've got Nancy Fund, who's the founder and managing partner of DBL Partners. We're going to hear all about what she does. And then we've got Anna Hajduka, who is the founder and CEO of Africa Green Co. So first up, let's talk. Nancy, welcome to the WiSER Wisdom Series.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Nancy, can you give us a thumbnail of what it is that DBL Partner does?
DBL, which we're celebrating our 20th year, if you can believe it, is one of the first venture capital firms to focus on impact and sustainability. The DBL stands for double bottom line. We believe there's no sacrifice between investing to make superior returns for your investors and investing to change the world for the better, particularly when it comes to climate issues. And so that's what we're all about. And we've been privileged to work with entrepreneurs, really setting the stage for the transition for now 2 decades.
Very quickly, you've been handling this trade-off between investment, trying to make money, and impact. Give us your thoughts. Is it a trade-off or is it a false trade-off?
It's totally a false trade-off. And today, 20 years in, it's very much accepted. Huge amounts of capital are going into impact investing, and a lot of that is slated for sustainability and climate. The old adage that if you introduced a social or environmental dynamic into your investment paradigm, your returns would suffer, has fortunately been proven false because of the entrepreneurs in the renewable sector playing a huge role. Impact investors were there at the very start of this transition with companies, in our case, SunPower, Solar City, Nextracker. And we saw very early that these companies could drive the transition away from fossil fuels, scale, and drive costs much lower. And so over a 10 to 15 year period, this worked, and we created enormous wealth for the investors in these companies, and of course set the stage for the energy transition that we're all now part of.
And of course, at a previous organization, I hope you don't mind if I point out that you were one of the first investors in Tesla.
Absolutely. DBL was in the first institutional round of Tesla, and then we went into Solar City. I mean, we've been very active in these early giants that really helped to disprove the notion that there was any kind of sacrifice, because believe me, if you had invested in Tesla as we did in 2006, you would never ever think there was a sacrifice on financial returns to usher in the age of transportation unhinged to fossil fuels.
So this is tremendously good news that is a false choice between impact and returns. Let's bring Anna into the conversation. Anna, you did not start your business in 2006, but you have now been going for around 10 years, I believe. Could you explain what is it that Africa Green Co does, and what do you think about that potential conflict between impact and return?
Thank you very much, Michael. It's a fantastic question. And yes, indeed, almost 10 years. 10 years next January, to be precise, since the inception of the idea. As you know, Africa Green Co started as a PowerPoint presentation 10 years ago, in effectively January 2015. And we have always called for a more systemic lens for development of the renewable energy industry in sub-Saharan Africa. We are today, since a PowerPoint presentation, we have turned into an operational first Southern African renewable energy trader and private sector member of the regional Southern African Power Pool. We believe that integrating the required scale of renewable energy for true decarbonization and transformation of the Southern African power sector can only be done on a regional basis by facilitating integration across a number of national borders through easier both technical and financial risk mitigation of the risks that we are encountering in that part of the world. So Africa GreenCo's role is really to provide comfort to the investment community that investments in the renewable energies sector in sub-Saharan Africa are worthwhile, and to operationally de-risk those investments by trading the new supply across the regional power pool and bilaterally the national borders of the different countries of our operation.
I want to dive in a little bit, if I might, into your strategy, because you talk about things like giving comfort and the power pool, and I just want to make sure that the audience kind of understands what is it that you're doing that's different. You didn't just say, let's go build a wind farm, let's go build a solar farm. You're working to systematically reduce the risk. Just give us the how are you doing that?
Right. So let me start just 30 seconds with a context. The context in Southern Africa and most of sub-Saharan Africa is that you have effectively the only buyers of electricity up until recently have been state-owned utilities. It's a single buyer model in most markets, meaning the markets are not liberalized for private sector participation outside of generation. The problem with that is that state utilities are very heavily indebted and therefore are not considered creditworthy as buyers. So whilst there is a significant interest in developing power projects in the region, there is a lack of what do you do with that supply and who buys it? The second problem with that is that because the state utilities are not considered creditworthy, it generally requires the Ministry of Finance or the state fiscal of a particular country to guarantee the power purchase obligations of those state utilities. Now, if you look at the IMF indebtedness levels of most sub-Saharan African countries, there is no fiscal space anymore to support those new generation transmission and other distribution projects required. So you suddenly saw a wave of the last 2 to 3 years of regulatory change in Southern Africa, whereby countries like Zambia, Namibia, and South Africa in particular have opened their markets to third-party participants like GreenCo. We have actually been at the forefront of that change. The first 5 years of our growth was not one of an operational company. It was one of working with the regulators to facilitate such open markets and the opening on the legal and regulatory side of things. And after that was done, we became the new private sector buyer in the region, and the way we can differentiate ourselves as compared to a state utility buyer is that first and foremost, our shareholders are highly rated impact investors, going back to your question on the convergence between impact and profit. Number two, we are a member of the regional Southern African Power Pool, so we operate in 4 countries, not only one as a state utility would, namely in South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. And therefore, through that, we can mitigate the risk of any single national demand being spread across the wider regional demand, which is huge. So the convergence of the impact and profit and financial risk mitigation can be seen through our business model. So I would fully agree with you, Nancy, that the two are one part of the same coin, so to speak.
What we're hearing, it might sound a little complex involving power pools, but essentially you are creating a bankable off-taker, somebody against which a developer can borrow, where a local player may not be able to play that role. But you've had to do an awful lot of work behind the scenes and getting the regulatory environment changed. Now, Nancy, you've also worked, some of the businesses you've invested in have been building renewables across the global south. And some of them I know have been more taking a kind of community energy direction. So do you want to give us an example of something that's in a way a little bit different to what Anna has been doing?
Yeah, I'm just a huge fan of what Anna is doing, first and foremost. Yeah, our experience in solar in the US led us to look at the global south as an area of need for both solar, but also battery storage and inverter technology that allows you to go back and forth between the grid and your other assets when the grid goes down without having to use diesel generators. And so company we invested in a long time ago, Zola Electric, is operating in Africa, Haiti, Rwanda, other parts of the globe, Tanzania. And we started with, we have 385,000 plug-and-play energy solutions across sub-Saharan Africa and a few other countries and other places, delivering renewable energy and the storage assets. What we did midway through was to recognize that we wanted to really get after the commercial opportunity as well as the residential, and that they were having problems with that weak grid, and we wanted to put in something that was distributed that allowed them to move back and forth. And so, for example, last year, working with USAID, Zola was able to provide clean, reliable, affordable solar power and battery storage to pharmacies throughout Tanzania, about 250 of them. And basically, these pharmacies were having trouble because they couldn't operate when the power went out. And yet women and families women who really buy most of these products for families really needed access. And so by putting in this system in 250 pharmacies in Tanzania, we are dramatically increasing access to healthcare solutions for women in Tanzania, as well as their families. It also avoids the local pollution caused by diesel generators. We're replacing that. And so that's another boost for the health impact of women and families in the region.
That's tremendous, and it really resonates with me. I did a project in Sierra Leone, putting in solar and batteries into a neonatal intensive care unit, and it would be very hard to imagine more vulnerable humans on the planet than perhaps a prematurely born baby in one of those clinics. So that very much resonates. A question for you. When you invested in that business, Nancy, were you driven by the gender angle? Was it because you knew that it would have a sort of disproportionately beneficial impact on the women in those countries? Or was it a very analytical decision that it was a good business and it was also going to do good, but was the gender piece important to you?
Well, of course, gender equality is at the core of what we do, and myself as a woman starting the first impact venture capital firm at scale means that it's in our DNA to look at the role of women, and we hope that we have become an example in many ways to people in the renewable field based on our work. So yes, looking at the populations that are disproportionately affected by climate change is part of our strategy. Women and young families and young children are included in that. Also the global south. I mean, honestly, we kind of looked around us as Solar City and Nextracker were gaining momentum, and we said, this is fantastic for the US, but what about where the population is really growing over the next several decades? There's nothing back then when we had started. So we felt very strongly that we had to not just focus on the developed world and go to places where there's extreme need, there's extreme inequity, and there's extreme population growth, so that if we don't do something now, we'll regret it a decade hence.
And Anna, if I can turn to you, you've been operating the countries you mentioned, Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa. There aren't that many women in the power markets or in the financial credit markets. But you've been an extraordinary operator. You've achieved a huge amount. Do you think it's been helpful that you've been a woman, or has it been something that you've had to kind of overcome?
I think it's been pretty helpful, to be honest, and I'll tell you why. The overall, the general population in Southern Africa, especially in the energy sector, and the leadership of the energy sector is predominantly male. And it's an extraordinary polite community. And I'm not saying I am not polite, but I am a little bit Balkan, which can come a little bit as a shock to many more polite male individuals. So what I'm trying to say is they've given me, I believe, more time to convince them of, because of the fact I'm a woman, it was very difficult for many in leadership to perhaps tell me off as quickly as they would have if I had been male. So I know it's a very strange answer, but I genuinely believe it is true. The level of politeness is so strong in this, especially this part of Southern Africa, that they found it very difficult to tell me a direct no. And I must admit, I took advantage of that by trying to buy that time to convince of the benefits of the system change we are trying to bring on board.
That is such an interesting answer, because I'm just very aware when I've operated in those countries in that region, I have to be, and I am incredibly careful not to explain what has to happen, because it's just not culturally appropriate for somebody my demographic to do that. What you're saying, you called it Balkan, but you're a Balkan woman, so you've been much braver in a sense, and therefore perhaps got more done.
It's a very thin line that you have to you have to be very careful, and it's a thin line that you have to walk, so to speak. Our model has been context developed through our collaboration with local stakeholders. So there was no need, we explained it in a different manner. We actually learned on how to come up with an appropriate model through our collaboration with the local stakeholders. What we had in 2015 was just a general idea. Opening of the power markets is a good idea. But instead of going to talk about Western power markets and teach people, we were taught by them about the context of their reality, and therefore together formalized a business model that works. So perhaps we didn't fall as much into that other line that would have been less accepted. But yes, I have, however, stepped on a few toes. I can honestly say that.
But I think the absolute key is to remain in everything respectful, because
100%.
It has to be these dialogues of different perspectives. If I might, both of you are incredibly successful women, entrepreneurs, leaders, investors in renewables, in clean energy, in impact investing. What do we need to do to make sure that there are more of you? That there are more? Is it more opportunities need to be created? Is it more that we need more role models? What are the couple of things that we could do? Nancy, I'd like to start with you. What could we do for there to be more Nancys in another 20 years, 10 years than there are today?
Well, I do think that this is an industry, and I've experienced it, where leadership by example, by showing up in a room full of men, makes a difference. And I know that in the early days of Powerlight, which was sold to SunPower and Solar City, the women employees had active roles. They had clubs to really shine a light on their role, and they made a huge difference. And the fact that Sunrun was started by a woman, Lynn Jurek, and is now run by Mary Powell. Over in wind, Alicia Barton at Vineyard Offshore. And people like myself and women who are leading across the world, this really makes a difference, because I spend a lot of time with these younger women groups, and they look to us to really help forge a path. In terms of strategies that work, I would say three. First is mentorship and sponsorship. We've got to provide guidance and support to help women navigate their careers, sponsors who advocate for women within organizations. Second, we have to have inclusive hiring policies. Thoughtful hiring practices can prioritize diversity, such as actively recruiting from broader talent pools, blind recruitment tools, things like that. And then another really important dimension that we've touched on is leadership development. Women often don't have the business networks that men have, and so we have to level the playing field. We have to have targeted leadership development programs, focusing on building skills, networks, confidence. For example, at DBL, when a partner such like me, when I sit on a board, I bring along a younger professional to see what it's like to be on a board, to show that sometimes you can be polite and sometimes you've got to use your sharp elbows to get things done, and show people the balance, show women that balance. So those are a few of the ways that we do it in our own business. When you look beyond the business and at other stakeholders, government and not-for-profits can play a critical role, because they can create policies that encourage more women in the pipeline. And we at DBL were a beneficiary of that early on, when the utilities had vendor programs that said, we want to have these utilities, SoCal Edison, wherever, buy more from more diverse vendors. We said, well, why don't you include your investment professionals in that? And so that was how we were able to get into a very historically male-dominated industry. And the pension funds, public pension funds, developed these programs as well. So it takes the micro efforts of every day in the office and at the board meetings, coupled with this broader societal commitment. And together, I think that we are making very significant progress.
That's a fantastic plug, actually, for WiSER, because you've talked about mentorship, you've talked about role models, you've talked about gender inclusive processes, you've talked about working with stakeholders and the broader society. I mean, that's pretty much what WiSER does. So that's tremendous. Thank you for that. Anna, what might have helped? I mean, you've probably also had colleagues, women that you graduated with from your studies, or maybe who embarked down a similar route to you, but maybe fell away. What do you think are the kind of one or two things that could have just kept the numbers and the focus up, so there would be more Annas today, or more in the coming few years?
I would agree with everything Nancy said in terms of the policies, and I think we are doing most of that inside Greenco. In terms of my own network, I mean, the most facilitating, the biggest support one could give is really flexible working arrangements for women at certain time of their lives when they become mothers. It shouldn't be a choice in this day and age whether a woman has to sacrifice her career for the sake of motherhood. So supporting working environments on that side are absolutely a must. I would also add that the most important thing, not only the environment, is who you marry or who your partner is. Because if you don't have a supporting partner, it's going to be very, very difficult. So I think we mentioned that before on one of our interviews, Michael, that without my husband, it would be very difficult to have achieved what I achieved.
That's right. I remember you came on my podcast, Cleaning Up, and I asked you what was the single thing that made the biggest difference to your success, and I was astonished, but it was very interesting because you named your husband. If I could ask you, setting that aside, Anna, if I could ask you for just to round off everything, I'll come to you in a second with the same question, Nancy, so you get time to prepare. What is the single thing that you would tell any early career person, young woman watching this, whether it's in the GCC region, the global south, anywhere in the world? What's your one message if they're thinking about potentially playing a leadership role, striking out in the way that you have? What do they need to know, or what do they need to do?
The single message is that they are a human being. They're not male or female. Believe in yourself, and you have absolutely no, there should be no sense that they are less worthy if they're female, notwithstanding any cultural or other barriers, or not barriers, but difficulties. It is very possible to be a woman leader. It's extremely necessary for the development of our global community to have, especially in the energy sector, where the energy poverty, so-called, most often hits women the worst. So I think that's what I would advise. It sounds a little bit cliche, but believe in your own worth. And when it gets very, very hard, keep calm and carry on.
So believe in yourself. Maybe, if I might, maybe they need to be a little bit Balkan, as you said, to use those words, to be determined and to go for what they believe is right and needed in any situation.
I would advise that, but gently. Balkan with a smile, otherwise it can backfire.
Maybe be a little bit Balkan, but definitely believe in yourself and have self-respect to start with, and then go for it. Nancy, what would be your piece of advice to close us off here today? What would be your piece of advice to an early career executive who's thinking of striking out in these very important directions?
Sure. Well, I love the answer that you gave, and support it wholeheartedly. In terms of this particular business, the renewable energy and sustainable climate activity, I think my advice would be, you're not signing up for a job. You're signing up to a movement that's going to change the world for the better and make a more sustainable future for you and your children. And the reason that's important is because when you're doing that, as opposed to just your job, you have thicker skin. You're able to get through the bad times, the battles with incumbency or with regulators or with whoever it is that seems to be standing in your path. And you have to take that approach that this is a long game. You've got to have that stamina, and you have to have that core belief that this is larger than any of us. And that will help you move toward creating a network of purpose and a network of support for that purpose. And so that would be my advice, is make sure you realize what you're signing up to. You're lucky, it's a privilege to do this work, but it's never just a job.
What a wonderful answer. Absolutely amazing.
Absolutely tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. So believe in yourself, but also believe that you are doing the right thing and it's important. I couldn't think of a better way to finish this 15th edition of the WiSER Wisdom Series. I'm sure my audience out there in virtual land, wherever they are, will join me in thanking my two guests, Anna Hajduka, Africa Green Co., and Nancy Fund of DBL Partners. Thank you both. It's been tremendous.